Hi, I'm Mark, and today we need to talk about the future of the so-called Windsor Framework. That's the agreement between the EU and the UK on the implementation of the Northern Ireland Protocol. With the agreement in the Northern Ireland dispute, the UK and the EU have achieved what is probably the best possible compromise. It is questionable whether this will also ensure peace in the long term. Rishi Sunak wants to start a new chapter here, and Great Britain and the EU may have had their differences in the past, and there still will be some. The British Prime Minister said during a visit by EU Commissioner Ursula von der Leyen, the first part. But we are allies, trading partners, and friends, is what Sunak said. Allies and friends? Well, you almost couldn't believe your ears when you heard that. Such words would probably never have occurred with Sunak's predecessors, the radical Brexit supporters Boris Johnson and Liz Truss. Sunak is a Brexiteer too, I know. However, with von der Leyen, he succeeded in what many had no longer thought possible, a deal intended to end the dispute over the so-called Northern Ireland Protocol. It is an agreement that both sides can be satisfied with from my point of view. The so-called Windsor Framework could be the first step in finally leaving the Brexit chaos behind for the EU side. But whether the agreement lasts now depends primarily on Sunak's powers of persuasion, both within his party and especially in Northern Ireland. The EU and von der Leyen are not taking any major risks with the new regulations. The past few years have shown that the UK has suffered considerable damage, both economically and politically, by leaving the EU. The Brexit misery has shown even the biggest EU skeptics, such as Hungary's Viktor Orban, that leaving the EU will bring significantly more disadvantages than advantages. And also the right-wingers here don't talk about this anymore. The timing to shake hands with the British was opportune, and nobody fears imitators in the EU anymore. For the British head of government, the Northern Ireland deal means a return to reason-driven EU policy, kind of. Sunak's predecessors Truss or Johnson wanted to unilaterally ignore the previously applicable Northern Ireland regulation, and this led to years of political confusion that voters increasingly disapproved of. As small as the chance may be that the British will forgive the Conservative Party for this odyssey in the next general election, the new course is Sunak's only chance to placate voters. On this path, however, Sunak now faces the most difficult task. In the coming days and weeks, he has to prove his negotiating skills again, especially in Northern Ireland, where the local unionist party DUP has to approve the deal. And then there's Sunak's predecessor, Boris Johnson. The most important Brexit supporter has not yet really spoken about this, but the fact is he could use the agreement as a curveball to create a mood within the Tory party against Sunak. The former Prime Minister is said to still have ambitions to return to the post. That's why I made this video yesterday. In addition, among hardliners, Sunak is still considered to be primarily responsible for the fall of Johnson last year. And ex-Prime Minister Boris Johnson initially did not comment. The London Times reported, citing circles close to Johnson, that he first wanted to study the government's proposals and think about them, or think about how to use them, who knows. So far, Brexit supporters have been reluctant to criticize the Northern Ireland deal. Should Johnson now call for an attack, the tide could quickly turn for Sunak. The Tories shouldn't fall for it. It would bring their further ruin. And after the agreement with the EU on the new Brexit rules for Northern Ireland, the Prime Minister sought local support. The deal reached on Monday aims to end this years-long dispute between the EU and the UK and ease trade between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK. But much depends on whether the agreement will appeal to the Protestant DUP party in Northern Ireland. Supporters of Northern Ireland's union with Great Britain have been blocking the formation of a government in that region for months in protest at the current regulations. If the agreement, dubbed the Windsor Framework, is implemented, Northern Ireland has the potential to become the most exciting economic zone in the world, with unhindered access to both the UK and the European single market. That's also what Sunak said while visiting a Coke factory in Northern Ireland in the county Antrim. His spokesman later felt compelled to clarify that this was not a criticism of Brexit. Before leaving the EU, not only Northern Ireland but the whole of the UK had free access to both markets. The now amended Northern Ireland Protocol was originally negotiated as part of the Brexit deal on Britain's departure from the EU. It stipulates that the customs border between Great Britain and the EU runs in the Irish Sea, and this is to prevent border checks between the British part of the Emerald Isle and EU member Ireland. But the rule also brought some difficulties, such as sending parcels, medicines, and bringing pets from the UK or from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. Union Protestant supporters in Northern Ireland also felt cut off from Britain and called for change. But it never had anything to do with travelling, by the way, because people asked that in the comments. Speaking on the BBC, DUP leader Geoffrey Donaldson praised the negotiated mechanism that would give Northern Ireland a veto over the role of EU law in its own market. However, his party will now examine the contract in detail. And a spokesman for Sunak said on Tuesday that the DUP had not been given a deadline for a decision. It's also important for Sunak that the Brexit hardliners in his own party do not block the agreement. Sunak had announced in the lower house that there should be a vote on the agreement, but there is no date for this yet. So it will take quite some time, I guess. Sunak received praise from an important critic from his own ranks. Northern Ireland Secretary of State Steve Baker spoke of a great result. The former chairman of the so-called European Research Group, that's a coalition of Brexit fanatics in the Tory party, was even relieved about the agreement. And Marc François asked some questions on Monday in Parliament that were to be expected from him, but he wasn't as attacking as I expected him to be. But the time might not have come yet. But there are some things about what Geoffrey Donaldson said. Well, yes, Geoffrey Donaldson. We talked about him a lot. But he was referring to the Stormont break. The Stormont break is, despite what some said in Parliament on Monday, not really something new. The Stormont break is based on a similar thing in the 1998 Good Friday Agreement that already applies to other areas. And so it's not nothing new. They just use the same for the Northern Ireland Protocol now. But what he didn't mention, and what many Tories didn't mention, except one question was there to Sunak, and he gave the right answer there, is that if the Stormont break is used, this once again will have influence on access from Northern Irish trade to the EU single market. Because Sunak didn't lie about this one, and I have to give him that, because we know other prime ministers that lied a lot about things like this. He said that the EU, in this case, can take countermeasures, and the EU would take countermeasures, that's what I say, in the case that the Stormont break is used. If new or amended EU regulations do not apply in Northern Ireland because of the use of the Stormont break, they can do that as part of the agreement. But then there needs to be a new assessment of access from certain parts of Northern Irish trade to the EU single market. So the use of the Stormont break would change the application of the Northern Ireland Protocol. And people must clearly understand this and not fall for anything that's just like, yeah, we just can stop the application of EU law here in Northern Ireland and that's it. No, it's not that it. Not everything stays the same and we just don't do that. There will be consequences of doing this, even if some Tories try to tell people otherwise at the moment. The Stormont break is a mechanism that gives the Northern Ireland Assembly the power to decide on the application of EU law, but not for free. Everybody must understand that. And they have a chance to talk about and decide about the Northern Ireland Protocol anyway next year, and afterwards every 4 years. And they also have the right with the Stormont break to decide on new or amended EU regulations after the full implementation of the Northern Ireland Protocol. But it is not as easy as some people are putting it at the moment. And on other things, when I read in the comments that people say, oh, the EU had to give in, or when I heard it in Parliament, yes, because our bill to unilaterally eradicate the Northern Ireland Protocol, the EU had to cave in. No. Those, except the Stormont break, but it's nothing new, as I explained, all those things in there with the red and green lanes, with the labels for meat that have to be put on now that is not supposed to go to the EU single market. The bangers, for example. The sausage war is over because the sausages now will be labeled. Watch my video from that time about the sausage war. I talked about these fracking labels, which Boris Johnson's government declined. They didn't want that. And now we get those fracking labels they could have had ages ago and ended this dispute ages ago. And there are a lot of other things in this agreement. I will wait for the legal documents for the implementation, the legal documents from the EU that go to the European Council and then to the EU Parliament, because that's the decisive part. I got a lot of fact sheets and everything from the EU and from, of course, all the documents from the British side. But what I want to see before I comment on details, on the very small details and all the probable traps in there, I will wait for the legal text. They are not there yet, but the EU Commission wants to get it quickly into the Council. And so it will not take too long until those texts will be there. But there's a lot in there that Sunak talked about in Parliament on Monday that might look a little bit different than how he let it appear. And especially some of the Tory members and especially ERG members that commented on Monday, they really have a sense for twisting reality, especially with the caving in of the EU stuff, and what I read in the comments, that some people are still that delusional as some comments as I'm reading at the moment. It's really, I can't even decide if that's amusing or just sad. But it's not my place to help those people. That's what professionals are for. But definitely we will continue to talk about this topic, and there will be some friction on the way to see this end up in Parliament as a bill, and it will be a running topic. And I'll see you in my next video. I'll be back.